the novel that you wrote in 2016 has garnered new attention because of events involving Russia and the implications. Just this week, the Senate came out with, the Senate Intel Committee came out with a finding that was contrary to the House Intel finding that Russia was trying to influence the outcome of the election. When you sat down to write that book, were you making a prediction? Was there something in the air? What drove you to write that storyline?
So it's funny, people think I was trying to predict something. I was not trying to predict anything. What I was trying to do through fiction book was trace out some of the deepest dysfunctions in our politics and show that through a story that those dysfunctions actually lead to real national security weaknesses, let's call them. And so, gerrymandering allows you to focus on just a few districts and that you can focus on to change the makeup of the House. We have election security weaknesses, dark money. I get into some. All these things add up to be perhaps the soft underbelly of our country that a keen foreign observer could figure out. And that was sort of what my book was about. And I think the reason I end up predicting or paralleling the real world is I was basically through a plot pursuing the same exercise that it looks as if Vladimir Putin was pursuing. How do you take advantage of America? Well, you can't really invade us. You can't do too much economically, although you could do some. But if you really wanted to, mess with our system or change the outcomes here, where you would go is the fact that we have really dysfunctional politics right now, institutionally. And so my book was trying to show that, and I think by trying to show it, I obviously stumbled into a plot that looks a lot like what actually happened. There are obviously some differences, but the reason I get calls and emails a lot is people who've read my book say, oh my gosh, how did you know this was going to happen? So it's been a pretty interesting journey.
The Ohio is, well, let's talk a little bit about what took place, I guess a week or two ago now in terms of primaries. There's been a lot made by the Republicans in Ohio that the energy is in the Republicans' favor because of turnout numbers. Give me your sense of that. I mean, what's going on there? How much of that is should be a concern? We're coming off a week where we had almost a diametrically opposed, I guess, analysis and outcomes in some respects, in terms of enthusiasm for Democrats and in terms of the left of the Democratic Party in ascendance. Give me your sense of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans in Ohio had a terrible primary cycle. I mean, they beat each other up, all ran far to the right, spent millions in the primary they didn't even think they'd have for governor. And so they were trying to get any story out of what was a disaster for them. And so they're spinning these turnout numbers. Here's the story in Ohio, and each state is different. We have a very clear pattern over the years that Republicans always have a better primary turnout than Democrats in our midterm primaries, in their primaries overall. In 2016, for example, 63% of the people who voted in the primary will vote on the Republican side. 37% voted on the Democratic side. That number was reduced to 55-45 last week. The Republican turnout plummeted from the 16 primary level. Ours fell, not a presidential, but by a lot less. And by the way, that's with one big difference. We, listening to Democratic voters in our state and beyond, we did not endorse in our governor's primary. So one consequence of not endorsing is we're not pushing the vote because it's up to each candidate. So we literally, as a party, were not using our party infrastructure to push turnout. The Republicans endorsed Mike DeWine and their Senate candidate. They spent weeks, probably months, using everything in their infrastructure to get the vote out for endorsed candidates they were worried might lose. And even with all that effort, the turnout number for them fell a ton. And the overall margin narrowed a lot. So people, that was sort of the first day story, the turnout number. The second day story from reporters both within Ohio and nationally have looked at it is this is a myth that they're spreading because they actually had a terrible primary. Our candidate for governor emerged from the primary ahead of Mike DeWine in Ohio. Mike DeWine was the Republican who won. He was a household name, but he went so far to the right trying to be Donald Trump. He's promising to get rid of Medicaid expansion, which even John Kasich was the quarterback of. And so the Republicans walk out of their primary, I think, badly wounded going to the general election. So we feel very good about not just the turnout, but the overall momentum we have going into the fall.
I mean, what do you, why is it that, I mean, you have this history of Democrats not coming out as strongly in the primaries as they might in the general election?
You know, honestly, I can't answer that. It just seems to be a very clear pattern. All I can tell you is this time we had our two favorite candidates, Kucinich and Cordray, they both actually started out relatively late in the race. And so they were the ones who had to do their own field. The party was obviously not in it because we were neutral, and neither one of them really had the time to build up major field operations. So I think in this year, the truth is that the Republicans had their infrastructure going to work for their candidates. We didn't. In 16, there was obviously a lot of excitement about the Kasich-Trump matchup. Bernie Hillary was exciting, but apparently their voters found the Trump-Kasich matchup very exciting. So I can't explain every race, but it's just been this very clear pattern that, and by the way, it has not been predictive in any way of the November election.
Interesting.
How that primary vote shows up. It's not a good predictor of ultimate energy in November.
All right, look,
in Ohio, it hasn't been.
All right. Well, listen, Dave, I want to take a quick break. And when we come back, there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about that I think, are very relevant, particularly, national stories that are relevant in Ohio, including the opioid crisis that has hit Ohio about as hard as it has any other state in the country. Certainly one of the top two. And I also want to talk to you about this potentially, it seems to be growing scandal around the so-called electronic classroom of tomorrow. It's been compared to CoinGate, which is a story that brings me down, a not particularly attractive memory lane, which we talked about quite a bit back in '06 on the old Air America. But and I wonder what the implications of a scandal like this will be for 2020 and 2018, for that matter. In a state that is obviously really crucial, particularly to presidential elections. All right, we got to take a quick break. I'll be right back. I'm talking to David Pepper. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio.